Hey there, garden friends. It's Heather at Bush Puppy Farm. Welcome to my office. Today we're going to be talking about garden planning and things that you can do to make your garden season go much smoother. Okay, so if you're growing a small garden, a container garden, or a farm, planning really should be part of your process. And the best time to think about it is in the winter months when nothing's really going on in the garden. I do all of my spring planting in the fall for my flowers. So I actually have to do that planning in the summertime. But for my summer season, I do a lot of that planning in the wintertime. And I definitely plan my vegetable garden, all my edibles, in the wintertime as well. So I have 3 steps that I use to plan and to make sure that I'm doing my crop rotations and everything's looking good. Actually make that 4 steps. So we're going to go over those 4 steps today, and you can take what you like from this. You can modify it to suit your needs. You can do it exactly. I've gotten the ideas that I've put together here from lots of different sources, and this is what works for me after many, many years of growing. So the first step is the map. I highly, highly recommend that you draw or use computer software, whatever works for you, a map of your growing space. Mine is very simple. I used cardboard and a pencil and a ruler and Sharpie. You can use whatever works for you. I will link in the description box below a video where I go into this mapping process in depth and show you exactly how it works. So we're just going to cursory go over it now. But I have 2 pieces of cardboard here. This is from an old box. This is the cardboard map for my the farm, for all the beds at the farm. So I have the beds that are in the high tunnel, I have the upper field beds over here, and then just as a list, these are not the locations, but I have things that I'm growing in pots and in the greenhouse, etc. And I have, this is a map of my home garden, and it's got, you know, all the raised beds and the different numbers, and I number my beds just for ease of recording because I also keep a garden journal, which I recommend you do, chickens, etc. So what do I use these for? Well, on these little slips of paper are the names of all of the things I want to grow. I have color coded them. Red for summer, green for the cooler season. That's not important. That's up to you whether you want to do that. Some people use different colors of paper for that purpose. I got this idea from Erin Benzacaine at Floret, and it works really, really well. So the nice thing about these and using the map is that you can move things around for a while, but until you figure out, yeah, this is the way I want it this year. So then once I do that, I take a photo, make a photocopy, and then this is the map that I work off of for the year. So I can make adjustments to it. It's no big deal. I mean, that happens, right? If we have a crop failure or we decide, nah, I'm not going to grow that. But having a baseline helps you plan what seeds you need to buy, what plants you need to buy, and then also when you need to start all those seeds. So now that you've decided what you're going to grow and approximately when you're going to grow it, you need to know a few really important things. The first one is, when is your first and last average frost date? Now, to figure this out, you simply go to Google or whatever search engine you use and type in first and last average frost date, and then put your town or even your address, because like in my case, I am in an area with lots of microclimates. So we have lots of hills. We even have some like small mountains. My house is down in a valley. And so a very narrow valley. And so one of my closest friends lives up the road, half a mile up higher on the hill. She can be 10 degrees warmer than me sometimes in the depths of winter. So I have different average frost dates than what is said when I look it up. So if I look up first and last average frost date for Orinda, California, which is the town I live in, it will be December 25th would be the first average frost date, and February 15th is the last average frost date. I've lived here in this house since 2017, and we have had our first average frost always fall just in these years. Now that, you know, they're looking at a much larger period of time, but in the 5 years that I've been here, our first frost has always fallen before November 15th, sometimes into October. Our last frost so far in the 5 years we've been here has always fallen after March 15th. This year we got a frost in April. So knowing your area is really important. If you've never grown anything in your area before, then you start with what's listed as your first and last frost date. Then you can keep records in your garden journal and make some adjustments to that to figure out, you know, what exactly is it for your particular growing location, because it might be different. Okay, so you know your first and last frost dates are your averages, right? Those are averages, but you know, you've looked that up, you know that. The other thing to be aware of is, what is your USDA hardiness zone? So this is a zone that is not tied to frost dates at all. What it's tied to is your lowest annual temperatures. So how cold do you get in the wintertime? And it's a range. So I am in zone 9B here. However, my coldest temperatures kind of fall in the 8B range. So because again, I'm in this little valley and I get a lot colder, I get a lot more frost than everybody else around me who's a little bit higher. So those are things to consider. So once you know that, then you can start planning if you're going to start seeds, for instance, or when you're going to transplant, you can start planning that. For instance, this is a seed pack. This is from Johnny's. It is delphinium, and it says, transplant is recommended over direct sowing. So if you read your seed packets, some give more information than others. Johnny's gives great information, but you can also look up online growing requirements or growing conditions for whatever you're trying to plant, and it'll tell you. So in this case, sow seeds 10 to 16 weeks before last frost. Okay, so that's the important number. You need to know what your average last frost date is. So for me, it's mid to late March, and then count backwards 10 to 16 weeks. That's how long your seeds are going to take before they're ready to get transplanted into the garden. So this is why you have to know those dates. Once you have all the seeds you want to plant and you've read, you know, when you need to start, then you need to start keeping track of them. Now, if you're only planting one or two things, it's not that big of a deal. But for me, I'm planting a lot of seeds, a lot of different varieties, a lot of different species. So I need a tracking system. And the one that I use is, again, very basic. I didn't spend any money on it. It's in Google Docs, or if you have Excel, whatever. It's just a basic spreadsheet. And I've kind of combined this idea from Erin Benzacane at Floret and from Jenny Love at Love and Fresh Flowers, as well as Lisa Mason Ziegler at the Gardener's Workshop. So I've used ideas from the three of them to really kind of make this spreadsheet work for me. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so here you see my farm planning spreadsheet. I've got a lot of other tabs in here, but this is the one that I use for tracking what I'm going to grow. I have the month here, seed sown or plug arrival week. So I talked before about how we work in weeks and not dates. And so in this case, week 1 is the first week of January. What I'm growing is Cynoglossum, which is also called Chinese forget-me-not. delphinium, lettuces, and violas. And so I indicate here whether I'm direct sowing them, putting them in soil blocks, plug trays, etc. I talk about the number of soil blocks I want, because I use soil blocks. If you're going to use blocking trays, then that's a different thing. You'll put that in here as well. Growing conditions. So some seeds need light to germinate and some need to be covered to germinate. So you'll need to find that information out. It's often on your packet. And so I put that in here. This says pinch. Some varieties of flowers want you to pinch them so they get multiple stems, and so I'll indicate that. I'll indicate spacing, and for my case here, whether I'm putting them at the farm or at home or both. And then the location, so in the green stalk, it's a row crop, on the fence, etc. And then I put my varieties here. So as you can see, each week is different varieties that I'm starting. And then what I do to make things easier for me is I pull out the seeds that I need for that week so that I can have them all ready to go and I don't have to dig through my seed boxes. So I have some seed boxes over here that I keep all my seeds in. You can see I've got flower seeds A through L, flower seeds M through Z, and then vegetable garden seeds in its own box. But these boxes here are already separated out for the weeks that were on the spreadsheet. So, for example, I said in week 1 we were growing Cynoglossum, that's this one here, Delphinium, there's 2 types of Delphinium, violas, and some lettuces. So I've got my gemstones blend here, and bok choy, and then some, what am I growing here? Little gem. So when I'm ready to go sow my seeds, I just take this whole packet with me out to the greenhouse and I'm all set. And the same thing goes for the following weeks. Then when I'm done with them, I put them back in my seed storage boxes for the next time I need them. So by following all these steps, I can accurately plan my garden, and by keeping notes on what I've been doing, so I have the spreadsheet, and each year I just copy this spreadsheet to make a new one so I can look back at the previous ones. And I have photographs of my maps where I'm planting everything, and the reason this is important is that I practice crop rotation. Now, crop rotation is not something that all home gardeners do, but I would recommend it if you can do it. And you may think, well, I've got a really small space, I just can't do that. When I started growing my vegetables here at the house, all I had was 4x4 raised beds. And I always rotate the crops each year through there because that prevents disease, infections from things like root knot nematode or other harmful things that live in the soil that you may not be able to see. So if you grow your, let's say, tomatoes in the same place year after year, you are eventually going to develop some type of disease in the ground. And you may not see it any other way other than your tomatoes are no longer performing well for you. So the way to avoid diseases and persistent pest issues in your garden is by rotating your crops. So that's why I like to have the map, because I can say, oh, well, this year I had, tomatoes here, so I need to move them to the next location this coming year. It just helps in my planning. And also you forget, especially the more stuff you plant, the more easily you forget. And some things, like tulips, for instance, for cut flower growers, because we pull them up, bulb and all, if we plant tulips in the same location you can only do it once every 7 years in that location, you can get a disease called tulip fire, which is like it sounds. It is I think it's viral, but it spreads through the entire crop like fire and destroys everything. It's a bad blight. So you don't want that. So we have to rotate where we put our tulips every year in order to avoid that happening. So yes, in the case of the tulip fire, I definitely have to have enough space to be able to do that. But so do it where you can, and that will definitely help you. The final thing I would like to recommend to you is keeping a garden journal. I have a bunch here. I kept them on paper for ages because it was just, I don't know, I enjoyed writing by hand and it was kind of romantic, and also I could draw whenever I needed to. So like, here's an example of my 4 raised beds and what I was putting in them spring and summer 2021. So going back to the rotation aspect for just a second, you can categorize your edibles into 4 categories: legumes, roots, fruits, and leaves. And so in legumes, obviously it's like peas and beans and stuff like that, potatoes. In root vegetables, it's onions, turnips, carrots, garlic, beets, radishes, that kind of thing. Fruits is cucumbers, tomatoes, squashes, peppers, melons, and then the leaf is obviously all your lettuces and all your salad stuff and herbs. So if you keep this idea of legumes, roots, fruits, and leaves, you can rotate where they go every year because you're keeping them in a grouping. So you're always going to grow those things together, whether it's in square garden beds or in row crops or in, wherever you're going to put them. Anyway, that's about crop rotation. This is about garden journals. So I have a whole bunch here. I've been keeping them for years. And what's important about them is you can go back and look at things because again, you'll forget, right? So what I like to do is I record the date and I record the high and low temperatures for that day and what the weather is, which I find interesting. Believe it or not, I started doing that after I visited Monticello and was looking at Thomas Jefferson's garden journals, which were extensive. For all his faults, he was a good garden journaler and a good gardener. He had a lot of help, obviously. Anyway, by keeping that information, you can go back and read about problems that you had that maybe you forgot about, how you dealt with them, and what the weather was like. That's how I determined really that, I have a different first and last average frost here than my neighbors higher up because I had been keeping records, right? We don't remember everything correctly usually. And so by having that in writing, it helps. Now, like I said, I've always kept it on paper, but finally, because I'm a much faster typist than I am a handwriter, I started doing it on the computer in a Google Doc, and it's just a continuous document. It's a living document. I do take photos and put them in there so that I still have documentation of things, visual documentation of things, and of course, lots of notes. And I still record the weather and the highs and the lows and all that kind of stuff. And also sometimes in there I'll put things that, treating it a bit like a personal diary, nothing super personal, but if I'm unwell or like this year when I had COVID, those are important things to note because that COVID infection led to kind of a cascade of disasters. And that is the reason why everything kind of fell apart for me. So it's good to record all those things. So in this video, we've gone over mapping. We've gone over first and last frost dates, what your USDA zone is, and where that matters is what you're going to grow. So since we didn't really cover it very in depth at all, I'll talk about it here for just a moment. When you buy seeds or when you buy a live plant or transplants, it's important to know what the hardiness zone is. Now, most of the time, if you're buying live plants, you're buying them from a local nursery, and most of the time, those hardiness zones, those plants will work in your zone because it's a local nursery. However, I have occasionally seen things, like I said here, I'm in 9B. I have occasionally seen things, especially I notice in the evergreen varieties, where they'll be, hardy up to zone 7. Well, that's not going to thrive here. It just gets too hot and not cold enough. So, keep an eye on that. Basically, you want whatever you're growing to fall to be in your zone range, right? To be hardy in your zone. So that could mean that, if you're in zone 3 or 4, you're not going to want to grow something over the winter that's only hardy to zone 6, say, or any perennials that are only hardy down to zone maybe 5 or 6, right? Because they're going to die. Even though they're perennials, they'll die in your zone because it's just too cold. So that's why you have to pay attention to that. So That's your hardiness zone. We've talked about reading your seed packets and finding that information either on your seed packets or online when you just Google how to grow XYZ, whatever it is you're looking for. We looked at my spreadsheet and how I use it to organize all of my planting so that it's all regimented, because I need that. I can't do it on the fly. I need to be able to plan. Depending on your gardening, if you're just, if you're growing food for your family, you can probably fudge a little bit here and there. For flower farmers, we don't have much fudge room because we are, or market gardeners, we're growing for consumption, for sale. And so we have to meet deadlines, and we have to work with the plants, days to maturity and all that kind of stuff. All of those things are important. So that's the other reason I keep a lot of records. And one of the other spreadsheets I keep actually is tracking when I plant something and the days to maturity, so that I know when things are going to be available, when they're going to bloom. So let me show you really quick. You could do this for anything you want, but I do it for flowers so I can plan for events and weddings and stuff. I can tell clients, this is what's in season during your time period. I'll show you. Okay, so this one is from Floret. I'm not going to show you the whole thing because this is not my personal property here. It's not really mine to share, but basically what we do is we have the plants on the side and then the months across the top, and then you just highlight in the middle wherever they bloom, right? And so it's by week. So for instance, amaranth for me doesn't come on until week 21, and it blooms throughout the summer. Black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia, for me is year-round blooming, so there are X's the entire year. Let's see, foxglove. My foxglove comes into bloom week 15, that is second week of April, and it goes until about the end of May, flowers. So by doing this, I can track what's going to be available when. And you can also do that with vegetables as well, edibles for your garden, because in future planning, you'll be able to start doing things that will help you have consistent food for more of the year. So let's talk about tomatoes, for instance. There are some tomatoes that have been bred to produce earlier and in the season, and some that have been bred to produce later in the season. So if you get a nice selection of those, kind of early, middle, late, then you'll have tomatoes for much longer in the year. So again, it's going to depend on what your goals are in your garden, but that's another tool that you can use, and you can set that kind of spreadsheet up on your own easily. And then the final thing that we talked about was seed storage, and lots of people store their seeds in lots of different ways. I've seen a lot of folks use photo, like these big plastic containers that have, I think they're old CD holders maybe, I don't know. Anyway, they store their seeds in little compartments. These are just galvanized metal seed storage containers from Gardener Supply, and they have dividers in there, and so I just put them in alphabetical order, and then I can go and dig through and find the things that I need. It's basically just a filing system, but however you store your seeds, make sure that you keep them in a cool, dry place. So keeping them too hot, definitely don't keep them moist because they'll either sprout and or rot. So cool, dry place. Some seeds, and they'll say this on the packet, need what's called a vernalization period. That means they need a cold period. And so I can't think of anything in like vegetable wise right now. I'm sure there are some. But for instance, if you're growing flowers, Bupleurum and Bells of Ireland need a vernalization period. So when I get those seeds in the mail, I stick them in my refrigerator for about 12 weeks before I sow them. That way they have the cold period that they need to then germinate well for me. So that wraps up garden planning, at least how I do it. I hope that you picked up some informational tips today, and maybe if you haven't already started planning for your garden, you'll give some of these a try. In our next couple videos, we'll dive deep into successes and failures for the year, as well as putting together the rain barrel on the greenhouse. That's coming. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a wonderful time planning your garden for 2023, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.